This video is not about the 1,500 people President Trump pardoned related to the January 6, 2021 protest. Nor is it about the events that led to that protest, people who entered the Capitol building, engaged in acts of violence, or damaged government property. This video is about the tens of thousands of people who traveled to Washington, D.C. to attend a Trump rally and peacefully protest. The vast majority of these people did not need or receive a pardon because they did not break any laws and were never even questioned by law enforcement. However, many of them still suffered serious fallout, such as losing their jobs, friends, and becoming social outcasts due to guilt by association. In this video, I will discuss some details about the January 6 protest that were never covered by the legacy media in the United States. I will also discuss some critical lessons regarding privacy that everyone, regardless of their political ideology, should learn from what happened to innocent people that day who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. I am Dr. John Padfield, an engineer turned state representative turned business professor, and this is Business Reform, where we discuss issues at the intersection of business, technology, and society. I frequently discuss privacy-related topics on this channel because privacy lies squarely in the middle of that intersection. This video has 4 sections. We will begin with a brief account of J6 events with photos from those events. We will then discuss the damage caused by the protest, followed by a discussion of the fallout from the protest. We will then wrap up this video with a discussion of the lessons everyone should take away from what happened on J6. But first, 2 quick disclaimers. First, although this video is about the J6 protest, I will draw comparisons to the George Floyd protest that occurred during the summer of 2020. For consistency, I will refer to all these events as protest, rather than using more emotionally charged words. And second, I have blurred most of the faces I have used in the photos in this video as a courtesy to the people in those photos. There were 2 major events scheduled in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021. First, President Trump was scheduled to speak at a rally at the Ellipse on the south side of the White House. Then immediately following the rally, attendees were encouraged to, quote, peacefully and patriotically march to the U.S. Capitol building, which is located 1.6 miles east of the Ellipse. Organizers of the protest had obtained permits from the U.S. Capitol Police, where people could protest in areas adjacent to the Capitol building. I will discuss those permitted areas more in a moment, as to the best of my knowledge, the legacy media never mentioned them. Apple Maps estimates the walk from the Ellipse to the Capitol to take about 35 minutes under normal circumstances. All the intersections on Constitution Avenue between the Ellipse and the Capitol building were closed and blocked by city vehicles because the protest organizers had secured permits for the rally at the Ellipse and the protest at the Capitol. Parts of Constitution Avenue and Pennsylvania Avenue were closed to vehicle traffic so tens of thousands of protesters could walk in the street. However, there were some people who skipped President Trump's rally at the Ellipse and went straight to the Capitol building the morning of January 6th. This group of people included Ray Epps, the guy known as the Scaffold Commander who used a bullhorn to encourage people to enter the Capitol, and people who tore down barricades and fought with police before the people who attended the president's rally arrived at the Capitol. By 7:56 a.m., 4 hours before President Trump spoke, the crowd at the rally at the Ellipse extended past the Washington Monument. Something that I never once heard mentioned in the media is that by 10:04 a.m., there was no cellular service for most, if not all, of the people in this crowd. I do not know if the loss of cellular service and internet access was because the cell towers were overloaded by the massive crowd, or if some government agency was using a signal jammer for security purposes. Regardless of why everyone lost cellular service, it prevented people at the Ellipse from getting any news reports or messages from loved ones back home about what was going on 1.6 miles away at the Capitol. President Trump approached the lectern at 11:57 a.m. and spoke until 1:12 p.m. The rally ended with the song YMCA. By 1:28 p.m., the majority of the crowd had only moved about 100 yards or so because there were so many people marching peacefully towards the U.S. Capitol building, unaware of the violence that had started there around 12:50 p.m. while President Trump was still speaking. One reason the crowd was moving so slowly was because numerous vendors had set up tables and tents in the middle of Constitution Avenue where they were selling American flags, Trump flags, T-shirts, bumper stickers, etc. Keep in mind, cellular and internet connectivity had been out for hours, so for the people peacefully walking to the Capitol building, the first sign that something was wrong appeared at 2:26 p.m. when a series of police cars with their lights and sirens on drove down Pennsylvania Avenue, which had been closed to vehicles so it could be used by pedestrians. I never heard anyone in the legacy media acknowledge the United States Capitol Police had issued permits for locations where protesters could legally assemble to peacefully protest near the Capitol building. Those locations are shown on this map. Those permitted lots for protesters were not well marked, so the difference between being in a permitted area and being in an area where you could potentially be arrested 4 years later for trespassing literally meant crossing a sidewalk. Adding to the confusion about where protesters could and could not go that day is the fact 6 U.S. Capitol Police officers were fired and 29 others were suspended for misconduct, including escorting protesters inside of the Capitol building. At 2:49 p.m., Washington, D.C. Mayor Bowser issued an emergency alert declaring a 6 p.m. curfew, and at that point, the vast majority of the crowd, especially those who had attended the rally at the Ellipse, began to leave. There were numerous crimes committed on January 6th, including property damage and assaults on police officers, but contrary to the blatantly false legacy media reports, all 4 of the people who lost their lives on J6 were protesters, not police officers. Officer Sicknick passed on January 7th of a stroke, and the medical examiner ruled it to be from natural causes. 3 months after January 6th, Forbes ran a story which cited official estimates of the property damage to the Capitol at $2.7 million. But just for context, let's compare the damage done by protesters at the U.S. Capitol that day to damage done by protesters across the United States throughout the summer of 2020. The, quote, fiery but mostly peaceful protest in the summer of 2020 spread across 140 American cities, and the insurance industry estimated the property damage from those protests at $2 billion. As always, links to all of my sources are included in the description of this video. This means the property damage from the George Floyd protest was nearly 1,000 times more than the property damage done at the U.S. Capitol. In addition to the property damage, 114 Capitol Police officers reported being injured on January 6th. I am in no way saying that this is acceptable. That number should be 0. I am simply providing context by pointing out more than 6 times as many officers were injured in the George Floyd protest during the summer of 2020. In Washington, D.C. alone, at least 60 Secret Service members were injured in a George Floyd protest on May 30th, 2020. The fallout from J6 started immediately as an unprecedented, coordinated effort involving the FBI, legacy media, private companies, and political activists did everything in their power to identify and demonize everyone who was in Washington, D.C. on January 6, regardless of what they did while they were there. According to FBI whistleblowers, without even being asked, let alone served a subpoena, Bank of America compiled a list of all its customers who used their credit or debit cards near Washington, D.C. between January 5th and January 7th, and handed that list to the FBI. They also gave the FBI a list of all their customers who had used their credit card to purchase firearms, regardless of when or where that purchase was made. The FBI put up billboards and signs nationwide seeking information on anyone who had attended the protest. In addition, a group calling itself Sedition Hunters scraped every photo of the J6 protest from social media and used software to isolate every face in the background of every photo. They then put those images on a website in an attempt to identify everyone who was anywhere near the Capitol building on J6, including tens of thousands of people who did not break any laws. I feel compelled to share an observation about all those faces that I blurred and thousands more just like them on the Sedition Hunters website. Those photos were all taken in early January when the temperature was 37 degrees Fahrenheit and everyone was still being encouraged to wear a cloth mask for reasons. How many face masks do you see? And while you are counting to zero, how many Gen Z or millennials do you see? The vast majority of people who were at the protest on J6 were Gen X and baby boomer men without masks and who were wearing ordinary clothes, not uniforms. The reason I bring this up is to contrast what Trump supporters look like compared to a group calling itself the Patriot Front, who are predominantly younger and fitter and who wear uniforms and face masks to hide their identity. The Patriot Front also usually gets police protection wherever they show up to keep people from getting too close to them. There are only two groups of people I can think of who are generally younger and fitter than the J6 protesters who also wear uniforms and masks to hide their identity. Other than the Patriot Front, I cannot think of anyone else who the police allowed to keep their masks, radios, and backpacks on after they've been arrested. Well, except for the J6 protester who was wearing a motorcycle helmet with a dark face shield, who was handcuffed by two U.S. Capitol police officers inside the Capitol building. He never removed his helmet or his backpack, and he fist bumped one of the officers as he was being released. I wonder what that was all about. If you have any idea what the fist bump was for, or why the Patriot Front was allowed to keep their backpacks and face mask on after being arrested, please let me know in the comment section. A recurring theme I have used in some of my previous videos is the idea of encouraging my viewers to choose wisely. The first thing I would encourage everyone to choose wisely is what they put on social media. Indie musician Ariel Pink lost a music contract after posting a photo on social media of himself at the Trump rally in front of the Ellipse. He never even went to the Capitol building, but his social media post was enough to cost him his contract with a record label. And Ariel Pink wasn't the only person to suffer consequences for posting on social media. CNN ran a story on January 9, 2021, detailing numerous people who lost their jobs just for attending the rally in front of the Ellipse or protesting in areas where protest organizers had obtained permits from the Capitol Police. Also, because companies like Bank of America are so eager to data mine their customers' purchase history and hand it over without even being asked, I would encourage everyone to choose wisely where they use their credit and debit cards. A few months ago, I made a video called Why You Need a Burner Credit Card, which explains how to use burner credit cards to protect your privacy from banks and credit card companies who harvest and sell your purchase history to third parties. So far, we have focused on the non-judicial consequences, such as losing your job for attending a rally at the Ellipse over 1.5 miles from the Capitol building. But let's briefly examine some of the people who were arrested for trespassing. Again, this video is not about those who committed acts of violence or property damage. According to a January 2024 article in Politico, more than 1,100 January 6 defendants were charged with a trespassing misdemeanor. Then U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves said, quote, "If a person knowingly entered the restricted area without authorization, they had already committed a federal crime." As I previously pointed out, the difference between being in a permitted protest area and entering a restricted area could be as little as stepping from one side of the sidewalk to the other side. So how did the Department of Justice know who had stepped somewhere they weren't supposed to? According to court documents filed by the Department of Justice, electronic devices had been set up in advance to create a geofence which would capture everyone's cell phone ID who entered inside the red dashed line, which was literally feet away from the permitted areas. This is why I encourage everyone to be careful where you carry your smartphone and where you wear your smartwatch. This is not a sponsored video, but I personally carry a Mission Darkness Faraday bag in my car in case I ever want to make my phone and watch completely disappear when I am away from home. I was an electrical engineer earlier in my career, so leave a comment if you would like for me to make a video on Faraday bags and share the results of my own testing on their effectiveness. I would also encourage everyone to choose wisely who you trust. Seton Hall School of Law reported data from the Department of Justice as of July 2023, which showed 72% of the people charged on January 6 were turned in by a tipster. The FBI usually doesn't identify who the tipsters were, but for those cases we do know about, the four biggest categories of tipsters are, in descending order, coworkers, followed by family, followed by friends, followed by classmates. And finally, I encourage everyone to choose wisely and to think critically about what you believe in the media. Returning to the data published by the Department of Justice, out of over 750 cases they had brought as of July 2023, the government had won all but 12. The DOJ claims 5 of those cases ended before sentencing because the defendant died. While that statement is technically accurate, it is extremely deceptive. At least 4 of those 5 defendants who passed away prior to sentencing were victims of self-harm because they were facing decades in prison for, quote, obstructing an official proceeding. 2 years later, in June 2024, the United States Supreme Court overturned the 20-year prison sentences given to hundreds of J6 protesters because the court ruled J6 prosecutors had misapplied a law passed in response to the Enron scandal that dealt with the destruction of evidence, not trespassing and causing a temporary disruption of a government proceeding. The Department of Justice also claimed that 22% of the J6 defendants had a prior criminal record. I don't doubt this for a minute. As I said previously, there were 2 main groups of people in Washington, D.C. that day. One group went to President Trump's rally at the Ellipse, lost cellular communications for hours, then walked down to the Capitol building unaware of what was happening. Very few people from this group were arrested, although many lost jobs and became social outcasts. The other group skipped the Trump rally, and it included Ray Epps, the scaffold commander, and the people who tore down the barricades and fought with police. A much larger percentage of this group were arrested. To use the terminology often used by quote-unquote fact-checkers, the claim 22% of the people arrested had a previous criminal record lacks context. The proper context involves answering the question, what percentage of Americans have a criminal record? The answer, according to a 2017 article on PolitiFact, which cites FBI data, is about 29.5%. In other words, the J6 protesters who were arrested were 25% less likely to have a criminal record than the average American. Regardless of your political beliefs, I hope you learned a few things about the J6 protest and the importance of privacy, because from time to time, a lot of people find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. I know there were many innocent people who took part in the protests throughout the summer of 2020. We just didn't see the Department of Justice and the legacy media attempting to identify and demonize everyone present during those, quote, fiery but mostly peaceful protests. What other lessons do you draw from J6? And what was the deal with that J6 protester with the motorcycle helmet who did the fist bump with Capitol Police? I can't wait to read your comments.